I stood there in front of the grand iron gates of the historic Charleston Conservatory, dressed in midnight blue silk, wearing pearls that once belonged to my mother-in-law. The air was thick with magnolia blossoms and old money, but none of it could mask the cold contempt in the doorman's voice. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the guest list." I blinked, my fingers unconsciously tightening around my small clutch purse. "I'm Caroline Beauregard, Ned's wife." He glanced at the tablet again, swiping through the digital list with practiced efficiency. "We were told not to let anyone in who wasn't officially cleared by Mr. Givens's office." Behind me, laughter rippled through the small crowd of Southern socialites lining up behind the velvet ropes. Savannah Lee Caldwell, always perfectly curled and constantly cruel, tilted her head with a mocking smile. Her emerald dress shimmered under the garden lights, drawing attention like she'd always craved. "Oh, bless her heart. She must have thought she was still relevant," she stage whispered to Margaret Hollingsworth, whose pearls were twice the size of mine and half as authentic. I could feel every eye on me, watching, judging, relishing my humiliation. 6 months a widow, and already erased from the legacy I'd helped build for 3 decades. The cool April breeze carried the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume as I squared my shoulders. I would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Just as I turned to leave with what little dignity I had left, Harold Givens, the family banker, came rushing down the marbled steps, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked pale, almost panicked, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. He locked eyes with me and froze mid-step. Then his voice trembled into the phone. "Yes, sir, yes. She's here. Yes. Caroline Beauregard is at the entrance." A pause, his eyes never leaving mine. "You want her escorted to the head table? Immediately?" The doorman snapped upright like a soldier called to attention. "Mrs. Beauregard, I apologize for the confusion. Right this way, please." The socialites fell silent. Their laughter died like a southern summer storm. And that was the exact moment their entire illusion began to crumble. I followed the doorman through the wrought iron gates, past the manicured gardens where Ned and I had attended countless charity galas over the years. The grand colonial-style building stood illuminated against the Charleston night sky, its columns reaching toward heaven like the ambitions of the men who built it. Inside, the conservatory had been transformed into a glittering tribute to my late husband's empire. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables adorned with white orchids and silver candelabras. A portrait of Edward Ned Beauregard III dominated the entry hall. My husband of 32 years, the titan of Southern energy, the man whose shadow I'd lived in and whose empire I'd quietly supported. As I walked in, conversations faltered. Champagne glasses paused midway to painted lips. Eyes widened, narrowed, then quickly averted. Harold Givens appeared at my side, his usual confidence replaced by an anxious energy I'd never seen before. "Mrs. Beauregard, we've prepared your seat at the head table. Mr. Benjamin is already seated." Benjamin. My son. The boy I'd raised while Ned built his empire. Now a man of 29 who hadn't returned my calls in weeks. I spotted him immediately. His father's jawline, his father's posture, his father's ability to charm everyone in the room. But tonight, as our eyes met across the hall, I saw something new. Uncertainty. And beside him sat Savannah, who had somehow managed to enter before me despite being behind me in line. Her hand rested possessively on my son's arm, her long red nails like warning signals against his dark suit. "Caroline," she called out, her voice dripping with honey-coated venom. "So good of you to join us. We were just discussing the Foundation's new direction." The Foundation. My foundation. The Beauregard Family Trust that I'd managed for 20 years, directing millions to education and healthcare across the South. The foundation that, according to the will Harold had read to me, now belonged to the family, a carefully worded clause that had somehow excluded its matriarch. I smiled thinly. "How interesting, Savannah. I wasn't aware you had any experience in philanthropic work." A flash of irritation crossed her perfect features before she recovered. "Oh, times change. People change. Priorities change." "Indeed they do," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. The seat that had always belonged to Ned. The seat that, by all accounts, should have gone to whoever was running the, Beauregard empire now. The room watched, breaths held as I smoothed my napkin across my lap. Harold Givens stood nervously at the edge of our table, his phone still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. He kept glancing at the entrance as if expecting someone else. "Who was that on the phone, Harold?" I asked innocently. though my heart was pounding beneath my composed exterior. "Just a business associate," he said, tugging at his bow tie, "ensuring everything is proceeding appropriately for tonight's announcement." Ah, the announcement. The real reason for this gala: to publicly declare the new leadership of Beauregard Energy Holdings, the company Ned had built from a small family oil business into a renewable energy powerhouse. The company that had been our life's work. "Mom," Benjamin finally spoke, his voice quiet enough that only our table could hear. "I tried to call you earlier." "Did you?" I raised an eyebrow. "How strange. I must have missed it among all the calls you haven't returned these past weeks." He had the grace to look ashamed, but Savannah squeezed his arm before he could respond. "Let's not ruin the evening with family squabbles," she said. "Tonight is about honoring Ned's legacy and looking toward the future, a future that, I'm sure we all agree, needs fresh vision and modern leadership." The implication was clear. I was the past. They were the future. Little did they know that the future had other plans. As the first course was served, Ned's favorite Charleston she crab soup, I noticed a commotion at the entrance. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair was speaking intently with the security staff. Beside him stood my oldest friend, Dwight Harris, clutching a leather portfolio. Harold Givens followed my gaze, and the color drained from his face. "Excuse me," he muttered, rising quickly. "I need to address a security matter." As he hurried away, Benjamin leaned toward me. "Mom, there's something you should know before..." "Before what?" I asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Before they announce that you're taking over as CEO with Savannah as your advisor, before they reveal that the foundation is being restructured to focus on modern priorities, or before they explain how your father's actual will has mysteriously been replaced." His eyes widened. "How did you..." "Benjamin," I said softly, placing my hand over his, "did you really think your father would leave me with nothing after 32 years? Did you think I was just going to disappear quietly?" For the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of my son. Not Ned's heir, not Savannah's puppet, but my boy, confused and possibly manipulated. "What's happening, Mom?" I squeezed his hand gently. "Justice, sweetheart. Long overdue justice." And as Harold Givens returned, with security personnel flanking him, his face ashen and his hands trembling, I knew the masks were about to fall. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time, before I became Mrs. Edward Beauregard III, when I was simply Caroline Deschamps, a promising young artist with gallery showings in Charleston and Savannah, known for my vibrant paintings of low-country landscapes. I had dreams, ambitions, and a voice that didn't hesitate to be heard. But love changes paths, and Ned Beauregard changed mine. We met at a charity auction where one of my paintings was being sold to benefit the Children's Hospital. Ned outbid everyone, paying 3 times the estimated value. Later that evening, with my painting tucked safely in his car, he asked me to dinner. "I don't want just the painting," he'd said, his confidence both intimidating and thrilling. "I want to know the mind behind it." Our courtship was swift and intense. 6 months later, I walked down the aisle of St. Michael's Church in a dress that cost more than my parents' house, into a world of privilege I hadn't been born to, but quickly learned to navigate. The Beauregards weren't just wealthy. They were Charleston aristocracy. Old, money, oil money, political connections that stretched from the State House to Washington, and expectations. Endless, suffocating expectations. A Beauregard wife, my mother-in-law Elizabeth had instructed during my first week in the family mansion, is seen supporting her husband, managing his household and representing his values in the community. She is never heard complaining, questioning, or challenging. I'd nodded, swallowing my natural inclination to debate. I loved Ned. I would adapt, and adapt I did. Year by year, I folded myself smaller to fit into the box they'd designed for me. My art studio became a nursery when Benjamin was born. My opinions became echoes of Ned's at dinner parties. My identity blurred into his shadow as his star rose higher. While Ned built skyscrapers and negotiated billion-dollar energy contracts, I raised our son, managed 3 houses, organized the social calendar that kept his business relationships thriving, and slowly, methodically built the Beauregard Foundation into one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the South. All without credit, all without acknowledgement, all with the understanding that I was merely doing what was expected. "You're so lucky," society women would tell me at luncheons, eyeing my flawless appearance and apparent freedom from financial worry. Ned is such a catch. None of them saw the lonely dinners when Ned worked late, the hollow celebrations when he missed Benjamin's birthdays, the quiet strength it took to smile for photographers at his side year after year, as if I had no identity beyond. Mrs. Beauregard. Only Dwight Harris, my friend since childhood, and now a prominent attorney, seemed to understand what lay beneath my carefully maintained facade. "You've disappeared, Caro," he told me once when we met for coffee during one of Ned's extended business trips. "The girl who used to argue philosophy until dawn and painted like her soul was on fire, where did she go?" I'd smiled, tightly. "She grew up, Dwight. She made choices." But in private moments, I sometimes stood before the mirror and searched for that girl in my reflection. Between the perfectly highlighted hair and the designer clothes, was she still there? Did she remember how to speak her mind? Would she recognize the woman I'd become? Those questions haunted me for years, whispered in the spaces between heartbeats as I moved through my carefully choreographed life. But I pushed them aside. I had Benjamin to raise, a foundation to run, a husband who, despite his flaws, I still loved. Then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Ned, the unstoppable force, the man who conquered boardrooms and built empires, was suddenly mortal, and everything changed. "I don't want anyone to know," he insisted from his hospital bed after the first round of treatments failed. "The business can't afford any signs of weakness." So I became his shield, his secret keeper. For 6 months, I managed his schedule, made excuses for his absences, and sat by his bedside as he grew weaker. I held his hand through pain no medication could touch. I whispered our memories when he couldn't sleep, and I listened when, 3 weeks before the end, he called for his lawyer. "The will needs changing," he told me, his once commanding voice now raspy and thin. "There are things I need to protect, things only you can be trusted with." I nodded, not understanding then what he meant, not realizing that in those final days, Ned had seen clearly what I'd been blind to: the circling vultures, the shifting loyalties, the quiet repositioning as people prepared for life after Edward Beauregard III. He died on a Tuesday morning in October, just as the sun broke through the mist hanging over the harbor. I was holding his hand. Benjamin was asleep in the chair beside us, exhausted from his vigil. It was peaceful, the antithesis of how he'd lived. The funeral was a state affair. Governors, senators, CEOs all came to pay respects to the man who'd shaped the South's energy future. I stood stoic in black Chanel, Benjamin at my side, accepting condolences with the grace expected of a Beauregard widow. But the reading of the will a week later was anything but graceful. Harold Givens, who'd been Ned's banker for 20 years, sat at the head of the conference table in the Beauregard Energy Holdings headquarters. Benjamin and I sat to his right. Savannah Lee Caldwell, whose connection to the family came through a distant cousin marriage, sat to his left, her presence unexpected and unexplained. "Before we begin," Harold said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I want to express that Edward left very specific instructions, some of which may come as a surprise." The document he read outlined a plan that left me breathless with shock. According to this will, the bulk of Ned's personal fortune, nearly $200 million, would be held in trust, managed by Harold Givens himself, with Benjamin as the primary beneficiary upon reaching certain professional milestones. The company would be led by an interim CEO chosen by the board, with Benjamin being groomed for eventual leadership. And me? I was to receive our Charleston home, a generous monthly allowance, and a ceremonial board position with no voting power. The foundation, my life's work, was to be restructured under new leadership. "This can't be right," I said when Harold finished reading. "I'm afraid it is, Caroline," Harold replied, sliding the document toward me. "Edward's signature, witnessed and notarized 3 months ago." I stared at the signature. It looked like Ned's, but something felt wrong. The timing, the provisions, the subtle ways it pushed me to the margins. None of it matched the conversations we'd had in those final weeks. "Ned changed his will 3 weeks before he died," I said quietly. "I was there when he called his lawyer." Harold's expression flickered. So briefly I might have imagined it. "This is the only legal will we have on file, Caroline. Whatever discussions you think occurred, well, grief can confuse memories." Beside me, Benjamin shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, Dad knew what he was doing. He always did." Across the table, Savannah's lips curved into a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "Change is always difficult, Caroline, but Ned clearly wanted to ensure the company's future. Surely you want to respect his wishes?" I left that meeting with the distinct feeling that I'd just been expertly maneuvered out of my own life. But something else left with me. A spark of the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Beauregard. A woman who didn't accept being silenced or sidelined. That evening, I called Dwight Harris. "I need your help," I told him. "Something isn't right with Ned's will." "I've been waiting 30 years to hear you say you need help," he replied. "Tell me everything." And so began my quiet resurrection. While the world saw Caroline Beauregard gracefully stepping aside, attending fewer events, declining board meeting invitations, seemingly accepting her diminished role, I was methodically building my case. Dwight's investigation revealed disturbing patterns. Unusual account transfers in the weeks after Ned's death, missing files from the company servers, and most significantly, the mysterious absence of Daniel Whitman, the attorney who had been with Ned the day he'd revised his will. "He's supposedly on an extended sabbatical in Europe," Dwight told me over secure phone lines. "No contact information, no digital footprint, just vanished." After Ned died. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance as Savannah's influence grew. She was suddenly consulting for the foundation, accompanying Benjamin to business functions, insinuating herself into every aspect of the Beauregard legacy. And Benjamin, my beautiful, intelligent son, seemed caught in her web, increasingly distant, increasingly defensive whenever I questioned the new direction of his father's company. "You don't understand modern business, Mom," he'd said during our last real conversation, his voice tinged with a condescension I'd never heard before. "Dad knew that. That's why he set things up this way." 6 months passed this way. I sold personal jewelry. I liquidated art collections Ned had given me over the years. I moved money quietly, setting up my own security net, independent of the allowance that could be cut off at any time. And I waited for the one piece of evidence that would change everything. It came 3 days before the gala. A phone call from Dwight that made my hands shake. "We found Daniel Whitman," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "And Caroline. He has the real will. The one Ned signed 3 weeks before he died. The one that names you as the sole trustee of everything." As Harold Givens hurried back to our table, I could see the forced composure in his stride. The confident banker who had dismissed my concerns for months was now visibly rattled. Behind him, Dwight Harris and the silver-haired man, whom I now recognized as Daniel Whitman, Ned's true attorney, were making their way through the crowd. "Is everything all right, Harold?" I asked innocently, taking a sip of water. "You seem troubled." "Just a minor security issue," he replied, his voice strained. "Nothing to concern yourself with." Savannah leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light as she moved. "Perhaps we should proceed with the announcements. Everyone is getting restless." Indeed, the room had that particular energy of anticipation. Order. Members, business partners, and social elites were all waiting for the official coronation of the new Beauregard leadership. Waiters circulated with champagne, preparing for the toast that would follow. Harold glanced at his watch, then toward the entrance where security staff appeared to be delaying Dwight and Daniel. "Yes, perhaps we should," he signaled to the event coordinator, who dimmed the lights slightly and tapped a microphone at the small podium set up near our table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harold began after taking his place at the podium, "welcome to this special evening honoring the legacy of Edward Beauregard III. As you know, the past 6 months have been a time of transition for Beauregard Energy Holdings and the Beauregard Foundation." I watched him closely, noting the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his notes. "Tonight, we formally announce the leadership structure that will carry Ned's vision into the future. As stipulated in his final wishes, the board has appointed an interim CEO, with Benjamin Beauregard serving as executive vice president, preparing to assume full leadership within 2 years." Polite applause rippled through the room. Benjamin straightened his shoulders, the perfect picture of the heir apparent. "Additionally," Harold continued, "we are pleased to announce that the Beauregard Foundation will be revitalized under new direction, focusing on sustainable energy education and modern philanthropic approaches, guided by a committee headed by Ms. Savannah Lee Caldwell." More applause, though I noticed several Foundation Board IR members exchanging confused glances. They, at least, recognized the absurdity of Savannah, whose charitable experience consisted entirely of attending galas, leading a major philanthropic organization. "And finally," Harold said, his voice now betraying definite anxiety as he spotted Dwight making his way past security, "we want to express our gratitude to Caroline Beauregard for her years of support and—" "Excuse me." Dwight's voice cut through the room as he approached the podium. I believe there's been a serious misrepresentation that needs correction before these announcements proceed. A murmur ran through the crowd. Harold's face flushed deep red. This is hardly the time or place, Mr. Harris, he said tightly into the microphone. On the contrary, Dwight replied, his voice, carrying naturally without amplification. This is precisely the time and place to ensure that Edward Beauregard's true final wishes are honored. He turned to face the room, his presence commanding attention. Beside him stood Daniel Whitman, holding a leather portfolio identical to the one that had contained the will Harold had read to me months ago. My name is Dwight Harris, longtime counsel to the Beauregard family. With me is Daniel Whitman, Edward Beauregard's personal attorney for the past 15 years. Whispers intensified. I felt Benjamin shift beside me, his eyes darting between Harold and Dwight. 3 weeks before his death, Dwight continued, Edward Beauregard executed a new will in the presence of Mr. Whitman and 2 other witnesses. That will was notarized, filed with the court, and legally binding. Daniel Whitman stepped forward, opening the portfolio. However, following Mr. Beauregard's death, Mr. Whitman was approached by certain parties who pressured him to suppress this document. When he refused, he was threatened and subsequently disappeared on a supposedly voluntary sabbatical. All eyes turned to Harold, whose complexion had gone from red to ashen. That's preposterous, Savannah interjected, standing abruptly. This is clearly a desperate attempt by Caroline to reclaim what is legally hers. Dwight finished firmly. Mr. Whitman has provided sworn testimony to federal investigators regarding the attempts to suppress the legitimate will, as well as evidence of significant financial irregularities at Beauregard Energy Holdings following Edward's death. The room erupted in hushed conversations. I remained perfectly still, my eyes fixed on Harold, who seemed to be calculating his remaining options. Daniel Whitman stepped to the microphone. With the court's authorization, I am here to execute the legal will of Edward Beauregard III, dated October 1st of last year, 3 weeks before his passing. He began reading, his clear voice cutting through the tension. I, Edward Beauregard III, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. To my wife, Caroline Deschamps Beauregard, I leave full control over all domestic and international assets, including the Beauregard Foundation, the family estate, and controlling shares of Beauregard Energy Holdings. Gasps echoed through the conservatory. Benjamin turned to me, shock evident in his features. Furthermore, Daniel continued, I appoint Caroline as the sole trustee of the Beauregard Family Trust, with full discretionary authority over all distributions, including those to my son, Benjamin Edward Beauregard. Savannah's face contorted with fury. She grabbed her purse and stood, but before she could leave, a tall woman in a conservative suit approached her. Ms. Caldwell, the woman said quietly, though in the stunned silence of the room, her words carried. I'm Special Agent Larson with the SEC. We'd like to speak with you regarding certain transactions from the Beauregard accounts. Privately, please. The color drained from Savannah's face. This is absurd. I haven't done anything wrong. Then you have nothing to worry about, Agent Larson replied calmly. Mr. Givens, we'll need to speak with you as well. Harold's shoulders slumped in defeat. The empire of lies he'd helped construct was crumbling in real time, before the very social circle he'd been so desperate to impress. I finally stood, smoothing my midnight blue dress. If you'll excuse me, I said to the table, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I believe I have some business to attend to with Mr. Whitman and the Foundation board members. As I walked away, Benjamin caught my arm. Mom, he whispered, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Did you know? All this time, did you know what they were doing? I looked at my son, Ned's son, and saw both the boy I'd raised and the man who'd been willing to believe I was disposable. Not everything, I answered truthfully. But I knew your father would never have left things the way they claimed, and I knew my own worth even when everyone else seemed to forget it. I squeezed his hand once, then let go. We'll talk tomorrow, Benjamin. Tonight has other priorities. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of legal discussions, signatures, and explanations to key board members. Through it all, I maintained the calm dignity that had become my armor over decades of standing in Ned's shadow. Outside on the conservatory's terrace, away from the murmuring crowd, Dwight finally handed me a glass of champagne. To justice, he said, clinking his glass against mine, and to Caroline Deschamps finally re-emerging from behind Caroline Beauregard. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. She was never completely gone, just waiting for the right moment. What will you do now? He asked. You control everything, the company, the foundation, the trusts. I gazed out at the Charleston harbor, the moonlight silvering the water. First, I'm going to clean house. The company needs ethical leadership, not just profitable leadership. And Benjamin? I sighed. He's my son. Dwight, he was manipulated by people he trusted. But he also needs to understand there are consequences to choices. He'll have to earn his way back, both to the company and to my full trust. And Savannah? Harold? That's for the authorities now. The evidence you and Daniel gathered points to serious financial crimes. They made their choices. Dwight studied me in the moonlight. You know, in all the years I've known you, I've never seen you look so peaceful, even with everything happening. I considered this. Perhaps because for the first time in decades, I'm not playing a role someone else created for me. I'm just being Caroline. Inside, the gala was disintegrating. Guests departing in hushed, scandalized groups. Tomorrow, the story would be all over Charleston society, then business news, then likely national headlines once the SEC investigation became public. But tonight, standing on the terrace of the conservatory where I'd attended countless events as Ned's silent partner, I felt only a profound sense of liberation. The masks had fallen. The truth had emerged. And I had reclaimed not just Ned's legacy, but my own identity. The morning after the gala dawned with a clarity that seemed almost too perfect. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the Beauregard mansion on South Battery Street, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, tiny galaxies swirling in the stillness. I sat in Ned's study, my study now, with a cup of tea, watching my phone light up with notifications. News alerts, text messages, voicemails, email after email from board members, foundation directors, and society mavens who had suddenly remembered how much they'd always admired me. Charleston's elite was realigning itself like iron filings around a new magnet. Human nature never changed. Power simply shifted. I ignored them all and instead opened my laptop to the document Dwight had prepared, a comprehensive overview of what we knew so far about the financial manipulation that had occurred in the months following Ned's death. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $40 million had been quietly siphoned from various Beauregard accounts through a complex web of transfers and shell companies. Harold Givens had orchestrated most of it, but the destination of much of those funds pointed directly to accounts controlled by Savannah. She was always smarter than people gave her credit for, I murmured to myself, remembering how society had dismissed her as merely decorative, just not as smart as she thought. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Margaret, our housekeeper for 20 years, peered in. "Mr. Benjamin is here to see you, ma'am," she said, her eyes warm with a loyalty that had never wavered, even when the rest of my world had tilted on its axis. I closed the laptop. "Send him in, please." Benjamin entered cautiously, as though crossing a threshold into unknown territory. He looked exhausted, his normally impeccable appearance rumpled, his eyes shadowed. He'd clearly come straight from his downtown apartment without bothering to change from yesterday. "Mom," he said, stopping a few feet from my desk. "Benjamin," I replied, neither warm nor cold, waiting. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that my heart contracted. "I don't even know where to begin." "The beginning is usually best," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat heavily, staring at his hands. "I didn't know about the fake will," he started. "You have to believe that." "I do," I replied simply. His head jerked up, surprise evident in his eyes. "You do? You're many things, Benjamin, but you're not a forger or a thief. That was never your moral failing." He flinched at the implied criticism, but didn't argue. "When did you suspect something was wrong?" "The moment Harold read that will," I said, pouring a second cup of tea and sliding it toward him. "Your father and I had our problems, but he wasn't cruel. And he understood value. Not just monetary value. He knew what I'd contributed to this family, to his company, to his legacy." Benjamin nodded slowly. "He always said you were the foundation everything else was built on. Yet you believed he would cast me aside so easily. He had the grace to look ashamed. Harold explained it as protecting the company. He said you weren't equipped to handle the complexities of the business in today's market. And Savannah? Was she better equipped?" A flush crept up his neck. "She was supposed to be temporary, an advisor to help with the social aspects while I learned the business side." And you didn't find it strange that this distant family connection suddenly had so much influence? That the woman who had never shown interest in anything beyond social climbing was now passionate about energy policy and foundation management? He stared into his teacup. She was convincing. I'm sure she was, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the hurt that still lingered. Manipulators usually are. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of betrayal and the uncertain path to forgiveness. Finally, Benjamin spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? With the company? With us? I considered my son, this man who had Ned's ambition but not yet his wisdom, who had been both victim and participant in a scheme that had nearly destroyed everything his father had built. The company will undergo a full audit, I said. Those responsible for the financial irregularities will face legal consequences. I've already spoken with the board this morning about appointing an interim CEO with impeccable credentials to stabilize things. Not me, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Benjamin. Not you. Not yet. He nodded, accepting this without argument. A small sign of maturity, I noted with cautious hope. As for us, I continued, that's more complicated. You're my son. I love you. That hasn't changed. But you don't trust me, he finished. Trust is earned, I said simply. You'll have the opportunity to earn it back, both professionally and personally. But it will take time. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen what was happening. I should have questioned more. Yes, I agreed. You should have. But regret isn't the same as growth. What matters now is what you choose going forward. As he left my study 30 minutes later, I felt the complex emotions of motherhood swirling within me, the instinct to protect warring with the need to let him face consequences, the hurt of his betrayal tempered by the knowledge of his manipulation. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity, calls with the company's executive team, a meeting with foundation board members who were equal parts apologetic and eager to align with the newly re-established power structure, conversations with Dwight about the ongoing SEC investigation. By evening, I was exhausted but restless. The house, this grand historic mansion that had been my prison and my palace for 3 decades, felt suddenly too large, too empty, too filled with ghosts of a past I was rapidly outgrowing. On impulse, I changed into simple linen pants and a light sweater, grabbed my car keys, and drove to a place I hadn't visited in years, Sullivan's Island. Ned and I had purchased a small beach house there early in our marriage, before the Beauregard empire expanded, before social obligations consumed our lives. We'd spent weekends there when Benjamin was small, collecting shells, building sandcastles, watching dolphins play in the surf. As Ned's business grew, our visits dwindled. Eventually, the house became a rental property, managed by our estate staff, visited by us only in tax documents and profit statements. The sun was setting as I parked in the dusty driveway, painting the weathered gray cedar shingles in shades of gold and pink. Between Oswey rentals, the house stood empty, waiting. I found the key in the lockbox and stepped inside. The furniture was different now, updated for renters' tastes rather than our own, but the bones of the place remained. The wide windows facing the ocean, the exposed beams, the small fireplace where we'd roasted marshmallows during winter storms. Moving through the rooms, I felt a strange doubling of time. The young Caroline walking these same floors, full of dreams and determination, not yet subsumed by the role of Mrs. Beauregard. On the back deck, I watched the waves roll in, rhythmic and eternal. A breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility. For the first time since Ned's diagnosis, I allowed myself to cry. Not the controlled, dignified tears I'd permitted at the funeral, but deep, racking. Sobs that came from a place I'd sealed off for decades. I cried for the young artist I'd abandoned, for the marriage that had been both prison and sanctuary, for the son who had lost his way, for Ned, who in his final weeks had tried to set things right. And somewhere in that release, I found clarity. I didn't need the mansion on South Battery Street with its perfect symmetry and historical significance. I didn't need to maintain the careful facade that had been my protection for so long. What I needed was this: simplicity, authenticity, space to rediscover the woman who had been buried beneath layers of social expectation and practiced grace. As darkness fell, I made a decision that felt both radical and inevitable. I would move back to this beach house. I would sell the mansion. I would lead the company and foundation with transparency and purpose, but I would do it as Caroline, not as the carefully constructed Mrs. Beauregard. Back in my car, I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. The world demanding my attention, my decisions, my presence. But for the first time in decades, I felt no urgency to respond. The tide of others' expectations had shaped my life for too long. Now, like the ocean before me, I would follow my own rhythms. Tomorrow, I whispered to the demands glowing on my screen. Tonight is for remembering who I am. And as I drove back to Charleston under a canopy of stars, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced since those early days with Ned. Not just purpose, but passion. Not just duty, but desire. The masks had fallen, yes. But more importantly, I had removed my own. 1 month after the gala that changed everything, I sat in my new office at Beauregard Energy Holdings, reviewing the preliminary audit reports. The space looked nothing like when Ned occupied it. Gone were the dark mahogany paneling and imposing furniture meant to intimidate. I'd had the walls painted a warm cream, replaced the heavy drapes with sheer panels that allowed natural light to flood in, and hung a collection of local artists' work, including, in a small act of personal reclamation, one of my own paintings from decades ago. The forensic accountants have traced most of the missing funds, said Rebecca Chen, the interim CEO I'd appointed with the board's approval. A brilliant energy executive. With impeccable credentials and zero connection to Charleston society, Rebecca had been exactly what the company needed. Competent, ethical, and unmoved by the whispers and machinations of local politics. And, I asked, scanning the highlighted sections of the report, approximately $38 million was diverted through a series of shell companies. Most ended up in offshore accounts controlled by Savannah Caldwell, though Harold Givens took his cut. About $6 million. Rebecca's precise, matter-of-fact tone suited the gravity of the situation. The SEC has frozen everything they could locate, but some funds remain unrecovered. I nodded, unsurprised. And the foundation? Largely untouched, thankfully. It seems they were planning a more gradual approach there, starting with changing grant priorities rather than outright theft. The foundation's reputation remains intact. Small mercies, I murmured, thinking of the decades of work that could have been undermined. Rebecca studied me with her characteristically direct gaze. The board is impressed with how you've handled everything, especially keeping the media focus on the financial crimes rather than turning it into a family soap opera. I smiled faintly. The Beauregard name has always been about more than just the family. Thousands of employees depend on this company's stability. The foundation supports hundreds of initiatives across the South. My personal feelings about betrayal don't supersede those responsibilities. A knock on the door interrupted us. My assistant, Marcus, a recent college graduate with a refreshing lack of deference to old Charleston hierarchies, poked his head in. Mrs. Beauregard, your son is here for your 2 o'clock. Thank you, Marcus. And remember, it's just Ms. Deschamps now. The name change, reverting to my maiden name while maintaining Beauregard for business purposes, had been both practical and symbolic. A reclaiming of identity without rejecting the legacy I'd helped build. Rebecca gathered her files. I'll leave you to it. We can continue this discussion at tomorrow's executive committee meeting. As she left, Benjamin entered, looking markedly different from the last time I'd seen him. Gone was the carefully cultivated executive image. His hair was slightly longer, his clothing more casual. Khakis and a button-down rather than the bespoke suits Savannah had insisted upon. Mom, he said, the familiar uncertainty still present in his voice. Benjamin, you're looking well. I gestured to the sitting area by the window, rather than remaining behind my desk. This wasn't a business meeting, despite its scheduled nature. The community service agrees with me, I guess, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. Part of our agreement had been that Benjamin would step away from the company temporarily to work with one of the foundation's housing initiatives. 3 days a week, he helped build homes in underserved communities across South Carolina. Physical, meaningful labor far removed from corporate politics. How is the James Island project coming along? I asked, genuinely interested. We're ahead of schedule. The Rodriguez family should be able to move in by next month. Something animated his features as he described the work, a passion I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy building elaborate structures with his Legos. And your sessions with Dr. Melton? I kept my tone neutral, though this was the part that mattered most to me. The therapy had been non-negotiable. Benjamin's expression grew more serious. Good. Challenging. He doesn't let me get away with much. That's why I recommended him. A small silence fell between us, not entirely uncomfortable, but weighted with all that remained unspoken. I saw Savannah's plea deal in the news, Benjamin finally said, his gaze fixed on the harbor visible through the window. Yes, 5 years, reduced from 12 in exchange for testimony against others involved. Are you satisfied? Or, with that? His eyes met mine, searching. I considered the question carefully. Justice isn't about satisfaction, Benjamin. It's about accountability and prevention. Her reputation is destroyed, her social standing gone. For someone like Savannah, that's perhaps a harsher punishment than prison time. He nodded slowly. She called me, from her lawyer's office before they took her phone. Tried to convince me it was all a misunderstanding, that you were vindictively persecuting her out of jealousy. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? Nothing. I hung up. He looked down at his hands, his father's hands, capable and strong. I keep thinking about how easily I believed her, how willing I was to accept that Dad would marginalize you after 30 years of marriage. What does that say about me? The question hung in the air, plaintive and raw. It says you're human, I finally replied. It says you were grieving and vulnerable and looking for direction. It says you made mistakes that you now have to live with and learn from. I paused. It doesn't say you're beyond redemption. His eyes, when they met mine, shimmered with unshed tears. I miss him. I keep wanting to ask him what to do, how to fix this. I know, I said softly. I miss him too. But Ned wasn't perfect either, Benjamin. He made his own mistakes, built walls between himself and others, prioritized success over connection sometimes, like I did with you, Benjamin acknowledged quietly. We all have patterns to break, I said. That's the work of being human. We talked for another hour, about the company, about his future role there, eventually, but not soon, about the beach house I was renovating on Sullivan's Island. It wasn't perfect reconciliation, but it was honest communication, something the Beauregard family had too often sacrificed in favor of appearances. After Benjamin left, I walked to the large windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. From this height, I could see the spires of the city's historic churches, the elegant homes south of Broad, the waters that had brought commerce and culture and conflict to this complicated place for centuries. My phone buzzed with a text from Dwight. Still on for dinner? 7 p.m. at Husk? I smiled, typing back. Wouldn't miss it. Our weekly dinners had become a cherished ritual, conversations that ranged from foundation strategy to literature, to memories of our shared childhood. Nothing romantic, despite the speculation in certain social circles. Just the comfort of someone who knew me before I was a Beauregard, who saw me clearly now that I was choosing my own identity again. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting golden rectangles across the office floor, I opened my laptop to the document I'd been working on, between meetings, the restructuring plan for the Beauregard Foundation. For 20 years, I'd directed funds according to traditional priorities: education, healthcare, historic preservation, good causes, important work. But now, freed from the constraints of others' expectations, I envisioned something more transformative. The new focus would be on economic empowerment for women, sustainable housing solutions, and arts education, bringing together strands of my own interests with community needs that had gone too long unaddressed in the South's philanthropic landscape. At 5 o'clock, I closed my laptop and gathered my things. Unlike Ned, who had routinely worked until 9 or 10, I had established firm boundaries around my time. The company would not consume me as it had him. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Car is ready downstairs, Ms. Deschamps. Anything else you need before I head out? No, thank you, Marcus. Have a good evening. You too. Oh, the contractor called about the beach house. Said the new windows came in and they'll install them tomorrow. I smiled, pleased. The Sullivan's Island house was coming along beautifully. Simple, light-filled rooms that would soon be my primary residence. The mansion on South Battery Street was already on the market, its proceeds earmarked for a new foundation initiative. As my driver navigated the evening traffic through downtown Charleston, I felt none of the exhaustion that had characterized my days as Mrs. Beauregard. Instead, there was a steady energy, a sense of purpose that came not from fulfilling others' expectations, but from making choices aligned with my own values. I had an hour before meeting Dwight, just enough time to stop by my temporary apartment and change. But on impulse, I asked the driver to take a detour. The waterfront park, please. Minutes later, I walked along the promenade where Charleston's historic district meets the Cooper River. Families strolled by, children laughed, couples sat close, together on benches facing the water. Ordinary moments of connection and joy that I had too often missed while maintaining the Beauregard image. Finding an empty bench, I sat and simply observed the life around me. A father teaching his daughter to ride a bike, an elderly couple holding hands, teenagers taking selfies with the harbor as backdrop. In the warm glow of approaching sunset, with the scent of jasmine and saltwater mingling in the air, I felt a profound gratitude wash over me. Not for the wealth or power that had been restored to me, though I wouldn't pretend those weren't significant, but for the freedom to finally live authentically. The masks had fallen, yes, but in their absence I had discovered something far more valuable than the approval of Charleston society or the trappings of the Beauregard name. I had found myself. "You're really going through with this?" Dwight asked, leaning against the doorframe of what had once been the formal dining room of my Sullivan's Island beach house. I smiled at him over my shoulder, brush in hand, canvas before me catching the perfect morning light streaming through the east-facing windows. "The gallery showing?" "Yes." "Why not?" "Because you haven't exhibited your work publicly in 35 years?" he replied, the familiar teasing note in his voice softened by genuine admiration. "Then I'm overdue, wouldn't you say?" 6 months had passed since the gala that exposed the truth. 6 months of rebuilding, restructuring, reclaiming. The company had stabilized under Rebecca Chen's leadership. The foundation's new initiatives were gaining national attention. The legal proceedings against Harold Givens and his co-conspirators had concluded with appropriate sentences, and I had returned to the passion I'd abandoned decades ago, painting the vibrant, evocative landscapes of the Lowcountry with a perspective deepened by years of observing from the periphery. The dining room was now my studio, its chandelier replaced with track lighting, its antique table with a sturdy workbench. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against walls. The scent of linseed oil and acrylic paint had replaced that of furniture polish and formal dinners. "The piece for the auction is nearly finished," I said, stepping back to assess the large canvas dominating my easel. It depicted the marsh at dawn, mist rising, between cypress trees, the water reflecting gold and pink light. But unlike my early work, this painting contained human elements too. A small boat, a distant figure, signs of life integrated with the natural world rather than separate from it. "It's extraordinary," Dwight said, coming to stand beside me. "You've changed your style." "I've changed everything," I replied simply. The annual charity auction for the Charleston Children's Hospital, the very event where Ned and I had met 35 years earlier, had invited me to donate a piece. But this time, I wouldn't be attending as Mrs. Beauregard, the CEO's wife. I would be Caroline Deschamps, artist and philanthropist, standing on my own merits. "What time is Benjamin picking you up for lunch?" Dwight asked, checking his watch. "Noon. He's bringing the preliminary designs for the community center." This was our new rhythm, professional collaboration woven with the gradual rebuilding of personal trust. Benjamin had thrown himself into the foundation's housing initiative with unexpected passion, discovering a talent for design that incorporated sustainable materials and community needs. Now he was overseeing our most ambitious project yet, a multi-purpose center in one of Charleston's historically underserved neighborhoods. "He's found his place," Dwight observed, "without Ned's shadow, without Savannah's influence. Without my expectations, too," I added softly. That may have been the most important part. After Dwight left for a meeting downtown, I continued working, losing myself in the meditative flow of brush on canvas. This return to art hadn't been planned. It had emerged organically during my first weeks at the beach house, when sleepless nights and emotional processing needed an outlet beyond the structured work of corporate governance. One midnight, unable to quiet my mind, I'd found an old sketch pad in a closet and begun drawing the moonlit waves visible from my deck. By morning, I'd filled a dozen pages. By the end of that week, I'd ordered proper supplies. Within a month, I'd cleared the dining room and claimed it as studio space. Now, 6 months later, local gallery owners were calling. Art critics from regional magazines had requested interviews. The very Charleston society that had once valued me only as Ned's elegant wife was discovering that Caroline Deschamps had always been an artist, just one who had put away her brushes for 3 decades. At noon, Benjamin arrived, carrying blueprints and takeout bags from my favorite Vietnamese restaurant. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing my cheek. "The meeting with the community board ran long, They had some fantastic suggestions for the childcare section. We spread the food and blueprints across the kitchen island, the one room. I'd renovated immediately upon moving in, replacing the dated fixtures with simple, functional designs that suited my new lifestyle. "Tell me about the solar integration," I prompted, watching my son's face light up with enthusiasm as he explained the innovative energy solutions incorporated into the building design. This was Benjamin as I'd always hoped he would be. Passionate, purposeful, using his intelligence and privilege to create meaningful change rather than simply accumulate power. The crisis that might have permanently estranged us had instead, through difficult work and honest conversation, led to a healthier relationship than we'd had in years. "The foundation board approved the increased budget," I told him when he finished his detailed explanation. "Construction can begin next month." His smile, so like Ned's in moments of genuine pleasure rather than public performance, warmed me. "That's fantastic. I promised Ms. Washington we'd break ground before winter." "And Beauregards keep their promises," I said, the old family motto taking on new meaning in our reconstructed relationship. After lunch, as Benjamin gathered his blueprints, his expression grew more serious. "I had coffee with Aunt Elizabeth yesterday." I paused, surprised. Ned's sister had been notably absent from my life since the GALA revelations, one of several family members who had aligned themselves with Savannah's faction and found themselves wrong-footed by the truth. "How is she?" I asked neutrally. "Embarrassed? Regretful?" He hesitated. "She asked if you would consider meeting with her. She wants to apologize in person." I absorbed this, measuring my own capacity for further reconciliation against the hurt that still lingered. "Tell her I'll think about it." Benjamin nodded, understanding the complexity beneath my simple response. "For what it's worth, I think she's sincere, and very alone since Uncle Robert passed." After he left, I returned to my studio, but found my concentration broken. Elizabeth Beauregard Hamilton had been a complicated presence in my married life, sometimes ally, sometimes critic, always fiercely protective of the Beauregard name and legacy. Her silence during the months of my marginalization had been its own form of betrayal. Yet as I stared at my painting, the small boat making its way through mist, the distant shore promising safe harbor, I recognized the metaphor in my own work. None of us navigated these waters alone. None of us were beyond needing forgiveness. That evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in colors no artist could fully capture, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine and my phone. After a moment's hesitation, I typed a text to Elizabeth. "Benjamin mentioned you'd like to meet. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Harkin Cafe?" Her response came immediately. "I'll be there. Thank you, Caroline." Setting down my phone, I looked out at the darkening ocean, feeling neither triumph nor resentment, only the quiet certainty that I was navigating by my own compass now, choosing reconciliation where possible not out of obligation, but from a position of hard-won strength. The next morning brought a call from Marcus at the office. "Ms. Deschamps, the buyer for the South Battery House, has increased their offer by $200,000. Their attorney says it's their final bid. I considered this while watching pelicans dive for breakfast in the surf. The mansion, that perfect showcase of Beauregard prosperity and tradition, had been on the market for months, its price reflecting both its historic value and my desire for a clean break. Accept it," I decided. "And Marcus, make sure the proceeds go directly to the Foundation's education fund, as we discussed." "Yes, ma'am. Oh, and Ms. Chen asked me to remind you about the board dinner tonight. 7 o'clock at Peninsula Grill." I smiled, appreciating Rebecca's subtle nudge. Though I deliberately stepped back from daily operations, maintaining my role as board chair, required occasional formal appearances, a balance I was still learning to strike. "Tell her I'll be there. And Marcus, it's still just Caroline, no ma'am, necessary." After hanging up, I walked barefoot along the shoreline, feeling the cool morning sand between my toes, listening to the rhythmic percussion of waves. A year ago, such an informal morning would have been unthinkable. My days, structured around Ned's schedule, social obligations, Foundation events. Now I moved at my own pace. Painted when inspiration struck, even if that meant working until dawn. Attended board meetings in clothes chosen for comfort rather than impression. Spoke my mind without filtering my thoughts through the lens of appropriate Beauregard behavior. Returning to the house, I showered and dressed, then spent the afternoon finalizing the auction painting. As the gallery deadline approached, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year, from the widow erased from her own life to a woman standing fully in her power. For the board dinner that evening, I chose a simple linen dress in deep teal, a color I'd always loved but rarely worn during my years as Mrs. Beauregard, when my wardrobe had consisted primarily of the neutrals and pastels deemed suitable for a Southern corporate wife. As I fastened my mother's silver earrings, the ones she'd worn to my art school graduation, before I'd set that path aside, I studied my reflection. At 62, my face showed the lines of experience, the silver threading through my dark hair a record of years lived. But my eyes held something that had been missing for too long, a clear, steady light of self-possession. "There you are," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. "Welcome back." The Charleston Children's Hospital charity auction was held, as it had been for 50 years, in the grand ballroom of the historic Charleston Hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with white orchids and silver candelabras. The city's elite circulated in formal attire, champagne flutes in hand, checkbooks metaphorically at the ready. I'd attended this event dozens of times as Mrs. Edward Beauregard III, always in a carefully selected gown that complemented Ned's tuxedo without overshadowing his presence, always with practiced smiles and diplomatic conversation designed to strengthen his business connections. Tonight I entered alone in a deep burgundy dress that moved like water when I walked. My hair was styled simply, my jewelry minimal, just my mother's silver earrings and a single bangle crafted by a local artisan. I wasn't here as anyone's wife or accessory. I was here as Caroline Deschamps' artist and philanthropist. Caroline! Dr. Miranda Jeffries, the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology, greeted me with a warm embrace. "Your painting is causing quite a stir. We've already had 3 people ask if they could place advance bids." "I'm glad to hear it," I replied, genuinely pleased. "The Children's Cancer Wing expansion is long overdue. Thanks in large part to your foundation's matching grant," she acknowledged. "But tonight isn't about your checkbook. It's about your talent. Come see how we've displayed it." She led me through the crowd to where the auction items were exhibited around the perimeter of the ballroom. My painting, Low Country Dawn, had been given prominent placement on the center wall, professionally lit to highlight the interplay of light and shadow, the delicate balance between wilderness and human presence. "It's magnificent," Miranda said softly. "Hard to believe you ever stopped painting." I gazed at the canvas, seeing both the technical skill and the emotional journey it represented. Sometimes we set aside parts of ourselves to make room for other things. The trick is remembering where we put them. As we chatted, I became aware of a subtle shift in the room's energy, the kind of ripple that occurs when someone noteworthy arrives. Turning slightly, I saw Benjamin entering with Elizabeth Beauregard Hamilton on his arm. They paused in the doorway, scanning the crowd until Elizabeth's eyes found mine. Our Tuesday coffee meeting at Harkin Cafe had been stilted at first. Weighted with 3 decades of complex history and recent betrayal, Elizabeth had apologized, her usual aristocratic poise cracking to reveal genuine remorse. "I believed what I wanted to believe," she'd admitted, that Ned had made provisions that aligned with tradition, that the company needed younger leadership, that you would be content with a comfortable retirement. She'd looked down at her untouched scone. "I didn't question what I was told because it fit my preconceptions. I failed you, and I failed my brother's memory." We'd parted, with a tentative plan to rebuild. Not the close relationship we'd never truly had, but something honest. Tonight marked her first public appearance at my side since the gala that had changed everything. Now she navigated toward me with determined dignity, Benjamin protective beside her. At 70, Elizabeth remained striking, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her posture military straight, her gaze direct. "Caroline," she said formally, taking both my hands in hers, "your painting is extraordinary. Ned always said you had remarkable talent." "Did he?" I asked, genuinely surprised. Something softened in her eyes. "He kept one of your early pieces in his private office at home. Said it reminded him of who you really were, beneath all the society constraints." This revelation, that Ned had treasured a part of me I thought he'd forgotten, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. Before I could respond, the auction coordinator approached. "Ms. Deschamps, we're about to begin the live auction. Your piece will be 3rd in the lineup." I excused myself to find my assigned table, where Dwight was already seated with Rebecca Chen and several Foundation Board members. As I settled beside him, he squeezed my hand briefly. "Ready for your triumphant return to the art world?" "Hardly triumphant," I demurred. "But yes, ready." The auction proceeded with the practiced efficiency of long tradition. A weekend at a historic plantation estate. a private dinner prepared by Charleston's most renowned chef, and then my painting. Next, we have Low Country Dawn by Caroline Deschamps, oil on canvas, the auctioneer announced. As many of you know, Ms. Deschamps is returning to her artistic roots after a distinguished career leading the Beauregard Foundation. We'll start the bidding at $10,000. A paddle went up immediately. Then another and another. Within minutes, the bidding had reached $30,000, far exceeding what I'd expected. I watched, astonished, as two bidders continued to drive the price higher. A distinguished older gentleman I didn't recognize, and surprisingly, Elizabeth. At $50,000, the gentleman hesitated, then lowered his paddle with a gracious nod to Elizabeth, who had shown no sign of relenting. Sold to Mrs. Hamilton for $50,000, the auctioneer declared, bringing down his gavel with a definitive crack. Dwight whistled softly beside me. Quite a statement she's making. Indeed, I murmured, watching as Elizabeth accepted congratulations from those around her with quiet dignity. Later, as the formal portion of the evening concluded and guests mingled over dessert and coffee, Elizabeth approached our table. "I hope you don't mind," she said, her voice carrying only to me. "I wanted it for the family collection, where it belongs." The family collection, housed in the Beauregard ancestral home where Elizabeth still lived, contained artworks gathered over generations, displayed with the reverence accorded to both artistic and monetary value. "It's your painting now," I replied. "You can hang it wherever you choose." She studied me for a moment. "You know, Caroline, I didn't understand what Ned saw in you at first. A young artist from a decent but unremarkable family. You didn't fit my concept of a suitable Beauregard wife." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I was wrong," she continued simply. "What I failed to see then, what so many of us failed to see over the years, was that you brought something to our family that had nothing to do with social connections or tradition. You brought substance, integrity, a quiet strength that outlasted all our pretensions. Her words, perhaps the most honest she'd ever spoken to me, hung in the air between us. "Thank you, Elizabeth," I said finally. "That means more than you might imagine." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Benjamin mentioned you're hosting a small gallery showing next month. I'd like to attend, if that's acceptable." "I'll send you an invitation," I promised. After she departed, Dwight leaned close. Well, the Queen Dowager offers her blessing." I laughed softly. "More like a truce, but I'll take it." The evening wound down, guests departing in pairs and small groups, checks written, charitable obligations fulfilled for another year. I lingered, savoring the strange circularity of the moment, this ballroom where Ned had first approached me 35 years ago, my painting the reason for our meeting then as now. Benjamin found me by the grand windows overlooking Charleston Harbor, the city lights reflecting on the dark water. "Ready to go, Mom? I can drive you home." Home. Not the mansion on South Battery Street where he'd grown up, but the beach house on Sullivan's Island, where I'd reclaimed myself. "Actually, I think I'll stay a bit longer," I said. "It's a beautiful night. I might walk for a while." He hesitated, protective instincts visible in his expression. "It's late. I'm not quite ready for a rocking chair yet," I teased gently. "Go on. I'll call if I need anything." After he left, I slipped out onto the hotel's harbor-facing terrace. The April night was mild, jasmine scenting the breeze, stars visible despite the city lights. Removing my heels, I walked barefoot along the promenade, feeling the texture of the stones beneath my feet, hearing the gentle lap of water against the seawall. I thought about the painting Elizabeth had purchased, the small boat making its way through morning mist, the promise of shore ahead. When I'd created it, I'd been thinking about my own journey from darkness into light. Now it would hang in the Beauregard ancestral home, a testament to both where I'd come from and how far I'd traveled. There was symmetry in that, a closing of circles that felt right without feeling final. Because this wasn't an ending, it was a continuation, a new chapter in a story still unfolding. As I walked along the harbor where ships had brought both fortune and sorrow to this complicated city for centuries, I felt neither triumph nor resignation, only a profound sense of alignment, of being exactly where and who I was meant to be. Caroline Deschamps, artist, mother, philanthropist, woman standing firmly in her own light. The masks had fallen, yes, but the face revealed had been worth the wait. 18 months after the night. That changed everything. I stood on the weathered deck of my Sullivan's Island home, watching a summer storm roll in from the Atlantic. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising thunder and cleansing rain. Behind me, through the wide windows, warm light spilled from the house where voices and laughter mingled. My gallery opening reception moved from downtown to my home when the weather forecast turned ominous. "There you are," Dwight said, stepping onto the deck with 2 glasses of champagne. "The artist shouldn't disappear from her own celebration." I smiled, accepting the glass. "Just taking a moment. It's been quite a day." Indeed it had. My first solo exhibition in 35 years had opened that morning at the Palmetto Gallery on King Street, 12 new paintings and a small collection of sketches that chronicled my journey back to myself. Art critics from Charleston and Savannah had attended. Collectors had made purchases. The gallery owner had already approached me about a follow-up show in the spring. "The Times article certainly didn't hurt," Dwight observed, referring to the feature that had run in the New York Times Arts section the previous Sunday. "Renaissance at 63, Caroline Deschamps reclaims her canvas." The piece had told my story with surprising nuance, not just the scandal and revelation that had made national news 18 months earlier, but the deeper narrative of a woman returning to her authentic self after decades of living according to others' expectations. "The publicity is nice," I acknowledged, "but that's not why I paint." "I know," he said simply. "That's what makes the work compelling." A gust of wind lifted my hair, carrying the scent of rain and salt. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the churning water. "We should go in," I suggested. "The storm's getting closer." Inside, my living room and kitchen had been transformed into an impromptu gallery space. Catering staff circulated with trays of local seafood and champagne. Friends, fellow artists, foundation board members, and a select few from Charleston's social circles mingled, examining the smaller works I'd chosen to display in my home. Benjamin stood near the fireplace, deep in conversation with Rebecca Chen. Their heads were bent close together, their body language speaking of more than professional collaboration. I watched them for a moment, pleased. Rebecca's brilliance and straightforward manner had been good for Benjamin, challenging him to rise to her level rather than fall back on family connections or charm. "They make a good pair," Elizabeth observed, appearing at my side. She'd become a surprisingly regular presence in my life over the past year. Not quite a friend, but a connection to Ned that had evolved into something meaningful in its own right. "They do," I agreed, "though I believe they're trying to be discreet." Elizabeth snorted softly, not succeeding particularly well. But then, the Beauregard men never could hide when they were smitten. I laughed, remembering how transparent Ned had been in his pursuit all those years ago. True enough. My gaze traveled around the room, taking in the gathered faces, some new in my life, some who had been there all along, a few who had returned after the upheaval. Not present, of course, were Harold Givens, still serving his sentence, or Savannah, who had fled to Europe after her release, her social capital entirely depleted. Their absence created no void. The room was full of genuine connections, people drawn together by shared values and mutual respect, rather than obligation or advantage. Marcus approached with a young woman I didn't recognize. "Ms. Deschamps, this is Amara Johnson from the College of Charleston. She was hoping to speak with you about the mentorship program. The Foundation's newest initiative, providing arts education and professional mentorship to students from underserved communities, had quickly become my personal passion. Already 3 promising young artists were receiving scholarships and guidance. "Of course," I said warmly. "Let's find somewhere quieter to chat." I led Amara to my studio where the large windows now showed sheets of rain obscuring the ocean view. Thunder rumbled, closer now, as we settled into the comfortable chairs I'd arranged around a small work table. "Marcus mentioned you're interested in our mentorship program?" Amara nodded, her expression earnest. "Yes, ma'am. I'm a junior studying studio art and arts administration. Your foundation's work combining creative education with business skills is exactly what I've been looking for." As she outlined her background and aspirations, I was struck by her clarity of purpose, something I'd lacked at her age, despite my artistic talent. She knew who she was and where she wanted to go, without apology or hesitation. "I'd like to apply for the summer internship," she concluded. "I know the deadline has passed, but I was hoping—" "We'll make an exception," I decided. "Send your portfolio to the Foundation office by Friday, and we'll schedule a proper interview." Her smile, radiant and unguarded, reminded me why this works. Mattered more than all the accolades or sales figures from my own career revival. When we returned to the main room, The storm was directly overhead, rain lashing the windows, thunder punctuating conversations. Despite the weather, or perhaps because of its dramatic backdrop, the gathering had taken on a festive energy, people gravitating toward the center of the open-plan space. Dwight raised his glass as I approached. "A toast," he announced, his voice carrying over the rumble of thunder. "To Caroline Deschamps, artist, visionary, and the most authentic person I know." "Here, here," came the response, glasses lifting around the room. I accepted the tribute with a smile, but as conversation resumed, I felt a sudden need for quiet reflection amidst the celebration. Slipping down the hallway to my bedroom, I closed the door behind me and approached the painting that hung on the wall opposite my bed, the only one of my works I'd kept for myself from the new collection. Unlike my landscapes, this piece was abstract. Layers of deep blue and gold intersected by veins of silver, creating a sense of depth and movement. I'd titled it simply Truth, though its meaning was more complex than a single word could capture. I'd painted it during the darkest hours of the legal proceedings, when painful details of the conspiracy against me were being revealed daily, when Benjamin was still struggling to come to terms with his role in what had happened, when the press was camped outside my gates, hungry for statements and accusations. In those turbulent days, this canvas had become my refuge, a place to channel emotions too complex for words. The resulting image spoke of pain transformed rather than erased, of light breaking through darkness without denying its existence. A soft knock on the door interrupted my contemplation. "Mom?" Benjamin's voice. "Everything okay?" "Come in," I called. "I'm fine, just taking a moment." He entered, closing the door behind him to maintain the pocket of quiet we'd found amidst the celebration. Following my gaze to the painting, he stood beside me in silence for a moment. "I've always wondered what you were thinking when you created this one," he said finally. I considered how to explain the complicated truth. "I was thinking about what it means to be the keeper of your own story. How truth doesn't always bring comfort, but it always brings clarity." He nodded slowly. "I think about that night at the gala often, how everything changed in an instant." "Not in an instant," I corrected gently. "That moment was just when the changes became visible to others. The real transformation had been happening for months. In my decisions, in Harold's and Savannah's choices, in your alignment with them, in your quiet strength," he added, meeting my eyes directly. "You never sought revenge, even when you had every right to be angry." "Revenge wouldn't have given me what I truly wanted," I replied, "which was never about punishment or even justice, ultimately. It was about reclaiming my own life and ensuring your father's legacy wasn't corrupted." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room briefly. In that stark white light, I saw my son, clearly, no longer the confused young man who had been manipulated by those he trusted, but a man coming into his own wisdom. "Rebecca and I are seeing each other," he said after a moment, changing the subject, but not really. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly." "I'm happy for you both," I said sincerely. "She's remarkable. She reminds me of you sometimes," he admitted with a small smile. "The way she doesn't compromise her values. The way she sees through pretense." I raised an eyebrow. "High praise indeed." "The highest," he confirmed. Then more seriously, "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For giving me the chance to earn back your trust. For seeing who I could be instead of fixing me in place by who I'd been." The simple honesty of his words touched me deeply. That's what love does, Benjamin. It holds space for growth without demanding perfection. A lesson I wished I'd learned earlier in life, one that might have allowed me to maintain more of Caroline Deschamps within Mrs. Beauregard all those years. But regret served no purpose now. The path had led here, to this moment of genuine connection with my son, to this life rebuilt on my own terms. "We should get back to your guests," Benjamin said after a moment. "In a minute," I replied, my gaze returning to the painting. "I just want to remember this feeling." "What feeling?" I smiled, finding the words for what had been building within me for months. Completion. Not in the sense of an ending, but in the sense of wholeness, of all the parts of myself finally in harmony. When we rejoined the gathering, the storm was beginning to move offshore, its fury spent. Through the windows, the final bands of rain caught the emerging sunset, creating momentary rainbows over the churning ocean. The sight seemed a perfect metaphor for the journey of the past 18 months, turbulence transformed into unexpected beauty, darkness giving way to multicolored light. As the evening progressed and guests gradually departed, with hugs, with compliments on both the art and the beach house transformation, with plans for future collaborations, I felt a deep contentment settle within me. By midnight, only Dwight remained, helping me clear the last glasses while the catering staff packed their equipment. Successful evening, I'd say, he observed, placing crystal flutes in the hall. Dishwasher with practiced ease, both professionally and personally. Very, I agreed, though I'm ready for some quiet tomorrow. Just me and my brushes. He studied me in the soft kitchen light. You know, I've known you since we were children, Caroline, but I don't think I've ever seen you look so peaceful. That's because I finally understand something it took me 63 years to learn, I said, closing the dishwasher and leaning against the counter. And what's that? He asked. That dignity isn't something other people grant you. It's not found in social position or others' approval or even in how you're treated. It's something you claim for yourself by living authentically, by honoring your own truth even when it's difficult. Outside, the storm had cleared completely, revealing a night sky scattered with stars. The ocean, still energized from the tempest, sent waves crashing rhythmically against the shore, nature's reminder that turbulence eventually gives way to new patterns, new possibilities. For years, I continued, I let people treat me like a forgotten ornament in a world built by men, but I wasn't just the widow of a legacy. I was the keeper of the truth. And when the masks finally fell, I stood tall, not because of what I inherited, but because I never lost my dignity. Dwight smiled, recognition in his eyes. There she is. The Caroline I always knew was in there. She was never completely gone, I replied, echoing words I'd spoken on the night everything changed, just waiting for the right moment to reclaim her place in the light. After Dwight left, I walked out onto the deck once more. The night air was fresh and clean after the storm, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. Stars reflected on the dark water, creating the illusion of infinity above and below. Standing there, with the sound of waves marking time's passage, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me full circle. From the young artist who had set aside her brushes for love, to the widow erased from her own narrative, to this moment of integration and authenticity. The masks had fallen away, revealing not just truth about others, but the essential truth about myself, that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes a foundation no one can ever take away again. And in that knowledge, I had found not just justice, but something far more valuable, peace.